Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our 14th session of Fire Chat Friday. Today, we're going to be talking about serious accident investigations and this critical incident stress management program. We have some great content and great speakers for today's session. But before we get started, just want to talk about a couple logistics. Please go ahead and make sure that your mics are mute. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box. We'll be looking at those during the session, but we have a specific Q&A set for the end of the session. The session, again, like I said, has a lot of information. You're going to hear from leadership about the program to give some backgrounds. And also we're going to continue our peer-to-peer conversation and hear from folks from the field that have participated in these programs and incidences. So with that, I want to get started so we can get to the information. Our session is going to be about 45 minutes, so a lot of good information, and we'll set for a Q&A afterwards. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bodie Ronk. Go ahead, Bodie.
Thanks, Jennifer. All right, welcome to Fire Chat Friday. Thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone about this. My name is Bodie Ronk. I am a serious accident investigation team leader. And I think the opportunity I wanted to address today was really coming to everybody and explaining a little bit of what a serious accident investigation team is, what we're there to do, what we can help with, and what's the purpose of it. I'll hit on a few of those key points. If there's more pointed questions, you can throw them in the chat and we'll get to those as well. But we also want to make time for everybody to share their piece of this. So anyway, serious accident investigation, what is it? So as you can imagine, it is an unexpected event that occurred that meets certain criteria for a level of review. And the reason for that review, the why behind it, which my colleague Jeff Armberger is going to get into some more specific examples of the whys, but really what we're going out there to do is try and understand the events that occurred and understand if there's any thing that can change at an organizational level or system level that could prevent a similar event from occurring in the future. That's our ultimate goal. Oftentimes when I arrive and I'm talking with people several times, the first question I'm asked is, do I need an attorney to be here with me? And it's a valid question. I get it all the time. You don't need an attorney. It's not criminal. It's not a criminal investigation. That would be something law enforcement would be doing. Not us. But anyway, it's okay to ask those questions of the SAI team. Ask your questions to be comfortable. What we do have before our team ever goes out anywhere is a delegation of authority. And that's something that you can also ask to see. The delegation of authority is our marching orders. And those marching orders come from our fire director, which is Grant Beebe. And specifically stated in that delegation of authority is what he expects us to accomplish. It's non-punitive. The intent of the review, out talking to people, is to try and learn from the events that have occurred and make meaningful change to our system moving forward. I'll tell you, if you ever encounter issues, you should let the SAI team leader know. If you're having struggles with anybody there, you should let people know that. You should reach out to our fire operations group, let them know that there's struggles going on there, and we'll totally intervene and make sure that everything is square going on there. So that's a high level kind of overview of what we're there to do. The team composition, it's made up of a few different core people, but we've got a team leader that's in charge of the group. We've got a chief investigator that is responsible for ensuring we're following the process that we're required to by policy. And we've got a safety manager on the team as well. That's the core initial group that's set up, and then the group is supplemented by subject matter experts. And the subject matter experts are people who we know in our community that have a lot of experience and expertise in fire operations and perhaps niche areas of fire operations. And that group of SMEs is there to really help guide the team, help understand the specifics of a particular operation or way work is done, etc., and really help steer that team. So just like CISM, we rely on homogenous groups for our expertise in these areas, and we take the team composition very seriously. We focus on finding the right people to get out there to do a good review so we can get good information to learn from an event and try and prevent it from occurring again in the future. So that's a little bit on the who and the what. If you have more specific questions on that or the why, please throw them in the chat. But I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jeff Arnberger. He's a deputy chief in fire operations, and he's going to touch on more of our why behind it, but specifically what we get out of these on the back end. So Jeff, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Bodie. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're at. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this again. You know, just to back what Bodie was saying, you know, we wanted to do this presentation today, both about the SA, our accident investigation process in general, and the CISM piece about to try and just kind of take the mystery or the boogeyman out of this whole thing. And I just want to reiterate one thing Bodie said is, you know, these are not criminal investigations. They're not civil tort investigations. You know, there's different thresholds of them depending on the severity or the seriousness. And those are in the red book in chapter 18. I'm not going to read them to you. Difference between serious accident investigation. But they all have a couple things in common. We're doing them because we're trying to prevent the same or similar instances in the future. That's the bottom line. We're trying to keep this from happening again to somebody else. And the other things they have in common are sort of the report contents, the final product. So before I came to the national office, when I was in the field, I always used to see these kind of reports come out that, you know, something bad happened, you know, we burn up a fire engine or a tree, you know, limb came out and hit somebody and sent them to the hospital, whatever. And I would always kind of shrug and go, well, nice story, but like, so what? Like, now what? Well, particularly in the serious accident investigation realm, there's a whole nother side. There's another step that goes on kind of behind the scenes that most people don't know about and don't understand. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So when a serious accident investigation concludes, there's two products that come out of that. One is what's called the factual report, and that's what everybody sees. That's what gets posted on Lessons Learned Center, and it's the facts of what happened, right? It just lays it out, chronology and eyewitness statements, all that kind of stuff. Here's what happens. There's another piece to that that's called the management evaluation report that actually goes to what's called the accident review board, and that piece contains findings and recommendations that the agency should implement to prevent things from happening in the future. And we have a ton of great examples of these things. In a lot of the sort of less serious accident investigations, you'll actually see these sometimes, the findings and recommendations right in the report. We see them all the time. But a couple that really stick out to me in my time since I've been at the fire center is the CR337 fatality. That was Caleb Ham. That was in 2011. Caleb was a Bonneville Hotshots. They were on fires, Bonneville Hotshot. They were on a fire assignment in Texas. And essentially, long story short, super hot day, super dry. He had heat-related illness and succumbed to that and died there on the fire line, despite all the best efforts, everybody there. And so tragic outcome, mobilized a serious accident investigation team. They produced a factual report. They produced also the management evaluation report, had some findings and recommendations. And long story short, some things that came out of that helped the whole community were just this super huge heightened awareness of heat-related illness It ended up, adding training, 6 minutes for safety topics, pieces in the fire refresher. And what you guys all probably know about is there's a page about it in the IRPG now that wasn't there before that. So now we've got information about how to identify it and treat it out to all our firefighters. And hopefully that's made a difference and prevented some people from having the same thing. One of the other interesting things that came out of this positive preventative thing that came out of that, I was kind of personally involved in it. We spent an entire evening, that first evening, driving around town. I did with leadership in my personal pickup truck, trying to find Caleb's next of kin, his parents. All we had was about a 3 or 4 year old emergency contact information card. They did not live at that address anymore. We didn't have updated information. We were scrambling. We were racing the press and social media because we knew they had a name and they had facts. And so we're in a race against time until someone at Caleb's at University of Idaho, where he went to school, called and said, we have this other old address. And this was 11 o'clock at night. And we actually drove there and found his parents and all that kind of stuff. So if you guys ever wonder why we have the annual requirement to update your emergency contact information and either do it in Employee Express or put it in that blue envelope with your boss or whatever, and why there's a policy in the Red Book, that's why it came out of that instance right there. So super positive, and we've seen big payoffs from that since. I'll just cover one other like real obvious fatality that gave rise to some stuff that's super obvious to particular our engine folks out there. The Denio engine rollover in 2016. If you're not familiar with that, we had a fire engine coming back in northern Nevada. They were out on lightning patrol, chasing some false alarms around stuff, and they had a front tire blowout at highway speeds and caused that engine to roll over multiple times. And 2 of the 3 folks in the engine were killed. The third one was seriously injured. So that was Jacob O'Malley and Will Hawkins were killed in that accident. So what came out of that one, on that finding recommendation sort of corrective action side of the house, other than just the report, were things like, now, everybody should know why you have to take your tires and get them internally inspected every year. That was one thing that came out of it. And I can tell you that we see every year, we get pictures and reports of people that they don't notice any damage on the outside, and they'll take that tire to a shop and they'll pull it off, and there's a sage stop sticking all the way through the inside. That tire was about ready to fail, and they had it on the front of a heavy engine. So that's one example. We now have replacement inspection criteria for all our tires, which, believe it or not, we didn't have before then. So there's like age limit and other things to look for where we actually have to replace our tires on our fire equipment. And then the biggest one is rollover protection in all of our vehicles, and it's been built into the light engines and the crew carriers for quite some time. It wasn't so built into the heavy engines. It is now. Every single one of our heavy fire engines is rolling off the production line. You can look inside it and it'll have a roll cage all around the inside of it. It's got airbags all over the place, side, front, back airbags everywhere we can get them. And it's got those, I can't remember the technical term, but if it senses an accident, any of the air ride seats in there immediately deflate and drop to the floor, and the seatbelts lock down to give you more survivable space in that passenger cab. That's huge. That's industry trend setting, but it came right out of that fatality investigation with Jacob and Will, where they perished in that. And to me, those are the really cool things that come out of these bad outcomes, is we're able to do something that positively affects the workforce from then on, prevents one of these accidents. And it's a really cool way to honor those people that we lose in these accidents. So enough about that. I'm going to move on here. It doesn't matter, like I said, whether it's a serious accident investigation or an accident investigation, which is just a kind of a lower threshold in terms of injury or property damage, or even a lessons learned review. It's the same intent. A lot of the end products are the same components and that kind of thing. And like I said, we're trying to take the mystery and the boogeyman out of this. So we kind of brainstormed and thought it'd be great. I'm going to turn it over to Zeb McWilliams and Craig Short here. But there are a couple of folks from a field unit that a few years ago, and I'll let them tell what the actual accident was and all that kind of stuff. But wanted to hear from them, their perspective on kind of being on the receiving end of one of these investigations that come in and what their impressions were.
It was burning in heavy juniper, ponderosa, broken country. Kind of came up with a plan of action. They had them tie in with the county. They did a lap around the fire. We're essentially calling for more resources, which we had none to really offer up to that fire, just due to the IA load that we had going on. We're able to get an air attack up there. Air attack was, keeping in good contact with me on what he felt the next 24, 48 hours looked like. So with that being said, the captain of the 2602 came up with a plan for him and his crew. To kind of go in direct, do what they could do until more help arrive. They were doing some pretty good work. They decided with the weather coming in, some lightning, pretty heavy winds to pull back to the truck for that evening, come up with a different plan. When that happened, the assistant on the engine at the time was walking back to the truck, said he smelled something that smelled more like a big electrical fire. That was right around 2100. They got within inside the truck, saw that the driver's side wheel well was on fire, starting to advance into the cab of the truck. I got a call from the engine captain right at about 2107, I believe, saying that the fire was in the wheel well, starting to move around, but they thought they could get a county truck over to help put it out. And I was like, my response to that was do the safest thing possible, but stay away from the truck. Within about 3 or 4 minutes, the captain called me back, said it was in the cab. It was fully engulfed. That took, just right around 4 or 5 minutes to happen. Once I found out that and that all the crew members were safe and accounted for, I made a call to our state operational duty officer. Had a conversation with him. He said he would tie in with the state FMO and then we'd get a hold of NIFC and start that process of getting an investigation team down. Took 2 or 3 hours of phone calls, pretty much in the wee hours of the morning. We got a plan together, and then the plan for me, as I was going on days off, because I was already maxed out on days off, I transitioned to Craig Short, who was our AFMO at the time, and transitioned duty officer to him. I had a pretty good glide path, and then from then I just went up to Buffalo the next day to meet with the engine, which we pulled off Woods Cabin, had them backfilled with another engine, and just had a kind of a debrief with them and got to make sure to account for their well-being. And that's kind of where my part in this ended. Now I'll transition this over to Craig.
Thank you, Zeb. Yeah, so when the Woods Cabin, this was in northern Wyoming in Sheridan County in a very remote spot. I was on an admin day off, actually, just at home, set to come back to shift the following day. So I got the call, and at the time, Chris Glode, when he was at FA, was the state DO. And even though this was a really negative event, that really streamlined the communication back to FA to get the ball rolling on what do we do from here. He also came almost immediately to the district to help lend some support, not knowing whether he was going to be part of the investigation. The next morning, the FMO, the district manager, and Zeb the FOSS all left super early to go up, visit the crew. They weren't going to go to the site, but they did go to visit and just kind of see where our folks were at and just really get a visual on how this was affecting them in the early stages. We also sent our unit aviation manager, who was a fully qualified UAS pilot. We sent him to the site so we could make sure we had it secured. I believe the sheriff's office had secured us the night before. And he also did a UAS mission. So he was able to map the fire, but then he was also to take a lot of really high quality photos of the burned up engine, which ended up being very beneficial to the team when they were in. So this day 2, I did take over as duty officer and started, move up and cover, getting some support in because we still have ongoing fires. We were expecting more starts and those sorts of things. And then when Zeb returned, we sent him on admin leave because he was timed out. That was not indicative of the incident or anything like that. It was just it had been a busy season and he was tapped. So it was quickly decided that we're going to do a rapid lessons sharing. And that team was identified really quick and they started mobilizing on day 2. And before they came, And I am going to call them out because this was a great group of folks that came and visited with our staff. And, you know, under that kind of cloud of a negative event. The team members were Steve Carrigy, Brock Ulig, Justin Lammers, and Chris Glode. And they came in, they hit the ground running, and we had an in-brief forum at the beginning of day 3. So I'll rewind a little bit. That first night, I get the call from Zeb, and my mind instantly gravitated to, are our folks okay physically? And once I kind of got filled in from Zeb on what all had happened, hung up the phone, kind of look at my wife, and she could tell I wasn't quite all right. And so what I'm going to talk about here now is some of the misconceptions and some of the concerns about when we have these negative events and we know that there's an investigation team coming in. My mind instantly went to fear and anxiety, right? They're coming in. I start to doubt myself as a leader, as a supervisor. You know, where did I fail my people that led to this? Trying to put myself in the shoes of the engine crew that just watched their engine, you know, go up in flames. What's going through their mind, you know, their concerns. Are these people going to come in and they're going to kick us when we're down? Is it coming in to have some kind of punitive action? Are people going to lose their jobs? You know, these aren't new feelings that we have when we have a negative event, but it's still a misconception. And that has since changed with me and Zeb as well, and a lot of folks in our program that had some tie to this event. You know, I think historically we laid blame. If we look back through some of our older investigations, it's the finger pointing, and that culture has since changed, at least in my opinion, and a lot of the folks that are on this panel here today. And we're worried that those teams coming in are going to be insensitive to that trauma that our employees have been subjected to. And it's still very fresh and very visceral when that team comes in, because we have to do these investigations in a timely manner. So those are some of the misconceptions that I had in my mind. And the interesting part is, leading up to this talk today, I had some of that anxiety again, because you look at these, when you're in and involved in one of these, it can be perceived as a black eye for your program, right? It can be embarrassing. It can give you anxiety. It's admitting that we erred, we missed something, you know, as an organization, we potentially failed. And I had a little bit of that anxiety in talking with everyone today about this, but then I reframed it, kind of thinking back to when we wrapped up the investigation, that it was a beneficial process. It was a negative incident that we never want to repeat, but it was beneficial in that we learned stuff from it. We gained some efficiencies, and we made some new connections with folks on those teams. And so I wanted to visit with that a little bit, and then go over a couple of the lessons learned. So one of the big ones, and Zeb alluded to this a lot, was in that first evening, once we knew the engine was a total loss, we needed to get our folks back to their station and try and at least get them off the clock, right? So through the fog of war and all the phone calls and those sorts of things, we didn't realize until the next day that our dispatch center did not know the engine had burned up. The crew called back into station in Buffalo, Wyoming, and called out of service. It wasn't until the following day that dispatch realized that the engine had burned up, that engine was no more. So everyone associated with this kind of made some assumptions that someone else was calling and notifying dispatch. The resource was still tracking, but no one actually told them that engine is gone. So that was a big take home for us. Some of the successes, Jeff alluded to getting ahead of the press and social media. We had lots of messaging going out early and often, and those were coming in different silos. We had the state office reaching out to NIFC and cooperating other BLM states, our neighbors. We had our field managers and district managers reaching out to internal employees that aren't BLM to let them know that it was happening. And then the FMO at the time reached out to all of our county cooperators and fire wardens and let them know that, yes, this happened. We're working through the process. We will keep you informed as we know more about it. So that was a big one. They were very quick to get messaging out there and try and get ahead of that, because as you know, that can be a huge challenge. The team coming in, we all had that anxiety at varying levels. Even with Chris hitting the ground first and the rest of the team following in, They were very sensitive to the trauma that we had to that engine crew. And they were very, very flexible and accommodating and calm and giving them some time and space to process, but also, spending some time of just obviously doing their due diligence to go through the processes and what led to the event, but just kind of coaching them up a little bit too. I listened in on some of the interviews and they weren't beating them down. They were trying to prop them back up and, kind of highlight that this, well, it happens. It's sometimes, unfortunately, more common than we want to acknowledge. And that's the reason for this, is if we can start to see those numbers tick down. The team was very patient, conscientious of emotions in the program. They, from start to finish, I never got the impression that this was anything but a learning exercise. Another success was our state AFMO working through the fog was very quickly, within a week or so, able to secure a loaner engine from BLM Oregon. So that crew was able to get that engine from Oregon, staff it up for the rest of the season, because we still had a big chunk of season left to go. And ultimately, that crew with a few other detailers finished the season in Oregon on that unit that gave us the engine on BLM severity. So that was a really cool that our partners stepped up and were able to keep our folks engaged and working. And then the other thing, fire community is pretty tight, but you never really see how tight it is until you have something negative happen, right? The amount of people that I've worked with, that some of my folks had worked with, that just reached out to say, hey, can we help? And, hey, don't let those guys be on an island, prop them up, visit with them, do what they need to do. And if there's anything we can help, it was really remarkable to see the amount of outreach. So I'll wrap this up, and this will kind of segue into the next panel members. But the thing that sticks with me in what I would do differently next time with this is I failed my folks in not making some type of peer support available to talk to them. Not saying making them talk to them, but have them available to them. And in this case, I don't even think that initial 4872 would have been effective. Looking back on it and looking at the longer term effects on that crew, that group was never the same. How they conduct themselves at work, their personalities, even though no one was hurt, those folks probably needed to talk to someone. And we also kept them working because we felt like that's what they needed, or that's what they wanted, but it's not necessarily what they needed for their mental well-being. So that's one of the things that sticks with me really well, is just having that availability of someone to talk to that knows a little bit about what we do, but they also have a very good grasp of the mental health aspect as it relates to first responders, firefighters, EMS. So Jennifer, I will kick it over to you.
Thanks, Craig. I want to say thanks to Bodie and Jeff, Zeb, and Craig for your information sharing and your perspective, as real as it is, from the field on what happens, and sharing that those lessons learned is key and critical. And we are a huge community, and we all need to stand up and support each other no matter what the situation is. So I appreciate that input and your perspective. With that, that's why we added CISM to this conversation as well, because just like Craig said, they go hand in hand. It may not be immediately, it may be a day later, or it may be immediately, but these two programs go hand in hand. And with that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Patty O'Brien and Cody Phillips to talk about Critical Incident Stress Management Program. Go ahead, Dr. Patty.
Thank you. So I'm very excited to have the chance to talk about Critical Incident Stress Management, or CISM, the CISM program. And Craig, and Zeb, I just really appreciate your perspectives and comments particularly about the role of peer support and the experiences that we know folks go through after critical incidents. And that said, I think it's different for everyone, but one of the things the primary aims of the CISM program is really to just provide that availability that Craig mentioned of peer support, and then also availability of a mental health clinician after a serious incident. So I'll talk just very briefly about just what the CISM program is in the Wildland Fire Service, and then also maybe a little bit about what it isn't. And we can hit some of those high points, and then I want to make sure that Cody Phillips has plenty of time to talk about some of his perspectives and experiences as well. So the CISM program has been a part of the Wildland Fire community for some time. I would say that it has changed significantly, or changed in some important ways, as we've learned lessons and evolved as a community, and learned more about how to best support people after serious incidents. So I guess some just of the core foundational information, what happens when a CISM support team is ordered, is usually about 24 to 72 hours after a serious event. A request for a CISM team might arrive on site, and that usually consists of peer supporters that have been trained through our CISM program. These are folks representing a broad range of operational areas in the fire service that have taken our training on delivering peer support to other folks in the fire community. So it'd be 1 to, I don't know, 3 to 5 peer supporters plus a peer lead. So it's a lead peer support has some additional roles of providing leadership, and then also some logistical planning for the team, and then also a mental health clinician. And in recent years, we really have developed a great pool of clinicians across the country that have great training and experience in working with first responders, and many folks that have a lot of expertise and experience working with wildland firefighters. So once a team arrives on scene, there's a range of different types of support services or interventions that they might offer, that could include, you know, I guess the core components of those interventions would include sharing information to groups of people. So most of these interventions are group focused, all of them that are aimed at, all of them are aimed at really sharing information about what happened, and then also information about mental health and what to expect when experiencing critical incident stress or traumatic stress. Information about when to seek more support after this event, and then also where. So it's presenting information about the facts of what has happened, mental health information, and then also referral information. And so some of the interventions are focused towards groups of people. Others, you know, the team will also just be available for one-on-one conversations with folks. So some of the common questions that I get about CISM relate to, you know, what is this exactly? Is this therapy? Is it like, what will the team provide? So CISM services are not therapy. It's really support and information that's made available after a serious event to help people get some footing in terms of reestablishing some of that those good coping skills that we need to rely on, getting information about you know, what kinds of stress reactions are very common after an event, and then also, again, where and when to seek support down the road. And then to me, maybe the hub, the core of the CISM program is really that peer-to-peer support that we really only get one way, which is through peer experiences and sharing that peer connection, you know, with other folks in, you know, who are working in our fire service. And so this is, again, not therapy, it's peer support. And that said, peer support is powerful and can go a really long way in helping people recover and navigate these types of high stress and in many situations life altering experiences. So pure CISM interventions are intended to be a short-term, very brief intervention. It's not a long-term support model. That said, peers and sometimes a clinician will check in with people down the road, and that's really to help identify, if people are needing more support and help to guide them towards those resources. It's not a substitute for professional mental health treatment. In the context of a serious accident investigation or any type of learning review experience, the CISM response is separate, so it's not a part of that investigation or learning review. But that said, these CISM and the investigation happen, often on the same time frames, and we have learned through many experiences that when the review team or the investigation team and the CISM team have some coordination and support of each other, so not sharing detailed information about what people are talking about, but logistics of, in support of how those two groups can best support people through these experiences, that it can be very helpful. So, for example, at certain parts of the SAI experience, it might be really helpful to have peer supporters and the clinician available for folks as they go through different parts of that experience that might be, particularly stressful. And we've heard from a number of folks that can be very effective when there's coordination and sort of mutual support between those two groups. So we're working towards having more awareness and more, sensitivity to both of those processes on the SAI side, and then also within the CISM peer support teams as well. So that said, that's some very brief information, but I will hand it over to Cody Phillips. I'm very appreciative that he is willing to share with us today some of his experiences as well.
Hey, thanks, Patty. So my name's Cody Phillips. I'm the superintendent for the hand crew out of Billings, Montana. And I guess I'm going to talk about a little bit of field perspective and some of my experience with CISM and serious accident investigation. So, initially I had been almost 20 years in operations, all hand crews and engines, and I had never been part of a CISM or an SAI at that point. And then that all changed in 2018. New crew, early season cutting project, and we had a guy low stump a tree, and the stump rolled down the hill and struck one of our employees, seriously injured him. It was a pretty traumatic event. We came back to our home unit and we were told that we were going to go through a CISM, and initial thoughts on that, I was a little upset. I guess I didn't know why, I guess, was one of the questions, but then I talked to some of my guys, and there was definitely some pushback on that as well. So we go to the CISM, we walk into the room, and I didn't really know what to expect. The first person I saw in the room was a really well-respected Region 1 hotshot superintendent for Flathead Hotshots. And it was almost like a sense of relief to know that he was in the room. Next guy I see is another superintendent from another crew that I knew, and then a few smoke jumpers that I also knew. So kind of a good vibe right out of the gates. We went through the CISM process as a group. I won't go into that too much, but at the end, we had time to talk to some of the peer supporters, the superintendents, and the other people in the room, and it really felt good for me to actually be able to talk to somebody that had been, in operations my whole career. I'd worked with those guys. I knew them pretty well, and they had been through similar experiences, and they just kind of understood where we were coming from. So the initial vibe of I didn't want to be there, why are we doing a CISM, it kind of left pretty quick. Transitioning in, we did a facilitated learning analysis similar to SAI after that, And overall, similar process, we had a soup of one of our other vet crews that was there. Bodie came over. People I also knew, and the important part for me for that was there's gonna be some bad in those SAIs, but there's also gonna be some good that comes out of them. And it can kind of highlight some of your training and some of the things you've done. And the important part for us was just that the report was accurate. That's all we were shooting for, is give them as much info, talk to them, and we wanted everything to be accurate. So once the CISM and the SAI was done, I started kind of thinking about, being a peer supporter, like the comfort level I had with seeing some of my peers in that room helping me. But I still wasn't sure if it was for me. And I had, one experience with CISM, and I was like, well, let me think about this if it's something I want to pursue long term, if I want to be a peer supporter or part of a CISM team. But fast forward 4 years later, Devil's Creek incident happened. I'm going to talk about that just a little bit, but kind of a prelude to the season. It was a really busy season in Eastern Montana. It started off super early. Our guys we were getting put to the test. We became part of a surge group within the region. So super fast paced firefighting, somewhat really high intensity, but kind of low commitment to incidents. So just bouncing from incident to incident, trying to wrap up whatever part of the fire they had that they needed help with. And so we get dispatched to Devil's Creek. We get there, we had just got demobbed off of another incident to go there, and we had to try to put a plan in place. And the plan was to at least develop an anchor, start working on working on the flanks. Long story short, there's a whole investigation on it if you want to read it, but wind burst out of a T-storm, torched a small group of timber, resulted in multiple people getting injured and burned. So it was a really tough day for me as a superintendent of a crew, developing the plan. But the hardest part of it all was coming back, and it seemed to be a lot of judgment early on from like a lot of various people. Why did this happen? What were you guys doing that caused this, etc. And it kind of affects you mentally, kind of breaks you down a lot. And then as the information kind of got out there, I started getting support from the community, fire community, from all sorts of people, other crew superintendents, past employees, current employees. I had people reach out from the national office. I know Jeff reached out, Bodie reached out, Steve Shaw. Like it, every time I talked to somebody, it kind of eased a little bit of the pain, and just the support from the fire community. Before the CISM, before the accident investigation team came out, it meant a lot. And so the CISM team shows up, and this is, I think, 2 days later. It wasn't the first time I'd been part of a CISM. I kind of thought I knew what to expect, but this time it was just a little different. It seemed to me a lot less coordinated. It was lacking some of the peer support that we had prior. It just had a different feel to it overall, and for me, this has got the wheel spinning, like how can I start helping people in a different role. But moving into the serious accident investigation, initially we sat down in a room with the whole crew, which was pretty nice. We went through the whole story. We actually pulled it up on Google Maps, walked them through the events from the time we started our shift at 0600 that morning to the time the burn actually occurred. And we all kind of fed off each other. There was parts of the story that I didn't recall, vice versa, and it worked really good. And then we did some individual interviews as well. I went back with the team the next day to the site, and I helped pick up a lot of the gear, the burnt gear, and walked them through everything from this is where the fire was when we showed up. this is where our burn operation was going. This is how much black, everything, you know, they flew their drone. And I talked with those accident investigation team folks, and for me, it was like really a big part of the healing process. And once again, I just wanted everything to be accurate. I wanted them to have all the information that they needed to be able to accurately represent what happened that day. And low pressure. I was out there with a few other folks that were involved with the incident. We actually became really close after that, just kind of walking through the events. And so that winter, I decided that I had got to the point where it was a traumatic event, still kind of dealing with it to this day. And I decided, I was like, it's time for me to try to help other people. So I took the training, the CISM class, and became a peer supporter. Went to a couple incidents last year. And I guess my part is like, I think I have enough validity now after like 25 years in fire, all in operations, that I feel like I can serve as a pretty good member on those peer support groups. But it's not for everybody. It's still, even going to those, it kind of triggers some of your past experiences. So it's something to think about. But that's kind of my story operationally and my perspective. SEIs have been good. CISMs have been kind of a mixed review for me, but the investigations have both been pretty solid, I would say. So I'll hand it back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Patty, and thank you, Cody, for that perspective. If anyone has any questions about participating in the CISM program and being part of the teams that go out, as well as SAIs, you can contact Dr. Patty and Bodie, and they'd be more than happy to help you share any of that information on being a part of. With that, next I'm gonna hand it over to Kyle Cowan. Kyle's gonna give us a little leadership perspective going into fire year 2023. Thanks, Kyle.
All right, you bet. Hey, everybody, my name is Kyle Cowan. I'm the division chief here, BLM Fire Operations. So it's my honor and privilege to be able to talk a little bit about fire year 2023 Leaders Intent. I had a buddy of mine over here a couple nights ago, and we were able to sit down and tell war stories and talk about fires that we'd been on for years ago, and it was super fun, and it just reminded me of how proud I am of the Wildland Fire Organization and the career I've had, and the memories and the friendships and the relationships over the years. So that to me is super important, and I'll kind of hit on that here again in a minute. So when I think about Leaders Intent, some things are pretty black and white for me. So I go back to what we teach in our leadership curriculum, and I think about task, purpose, and end state. So whenever I think about kind of delivering what that leader's intent message looks like, I think the task at hand is we need to go out and do the jobs that we've been hired to do. So that's what that task looks like. We need to focus on what we've been hired to do and what we're going to do well. There's a lot of background noise, of course, whenever it comes to the new series and the different pay scales and just all these different things that are going on right now. But what we need to do is focus on the task at hand. So that means if you're on an engine, that means you get to focus on your engine and initial attack. If you're on a crew, if you're a smoke jumper, if you're in dispatch, if you're on hell attack, everybody has a task, and we all know what that job is. So I know there's a lot of background noise. I know there's a lot of things going on out there, but remember, now is time to focus. So that's kind of the task piece of it. I think the purpose of that is what we do is important. It's important to our communities. It's important to the taxpayers who pay us. And it's important for us to focus on what we're doing, because that also helps ensure our safety and our livelihood. So kind of that purpose and task all goes together. What we do, we need to do safely. We need to be deliberate about how we do it. And we've got lots of safety risk mitigation processes out there to help us. But that's kind of the task and the purpose. And in my mind, kind of going back to spending some time with a buddy of mine, the end state is whether it's the end of the day or the end of your season, or maybe even the end of your career, you can sit down and you can talk about all these different adventures that you've been on, and you can share these stories with the people that you've built a relationship with. So that's kind of what I think about whenever I think about leaders' intent for the season. We've all got a job to do. We need to do it safely. And I think at the end of the day, it's a program that we can be super proud of, that we're involved in. So that's kind of leaders' intent from me. So back to you, Jennifer. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Kyle, for that perspective and leaders' intent for fire year 2023. Appreciate that. Appreciate all our speakers today. Do we have any questions that folks have? You can either put them in the chat box or raise your hand and you can ask them live. All right, looking in the chat box, I don't see anything yet. No hands raised. While we're waiting for folks, just again, want to give a shout out to our speakers and to our providing that input and perspective and their experience on the going through the process, being very transparent on the process and how they interacted, how they felt, lessons learned. So appreciate that from folks. And that's why we do these peer-to-peer sessions, is getting that ground perspective so they can hear it from folks that have actually gone through the process and the investigations, to kind of hear what they have. I'm definitely sure that if you have any questions, you guys can reach out to them for any their other insight offline. They'd be more than happy to talk you through any of those things if you have questions pertaining to both the SAI investigation as well as the CISM program. I don't see any questions, and I know it's a Friday and I want to give everyone some time back, so we'll kind of close out. If you do have any questions, go ahead and send them to us. We'll get them answered. And as always, we'll follow up next week with our recording and information for the session. This is our last Fire Chat Friday for the spring. We'll pick this up again in September, where we will talk about hiring and recruitment. I have put some links in the chat box for our BLM BLM careers page on NIFC, as well as our NIFC fire jobs portal, and also a SharePoint link that has the recruitment materials that could be utilized. So we'll be meeting those, coming out with a date here shortly, but looks like towards the end of September we'll be having those, talking about how to apply for USA jobs, using the tools that folks have, different recruitment methods, just very informational session concerning going into recruiting for fire season 2024. Again, thanks everyone for joining our session today. Have a safe and productive fire year, and we'll talk to you guys next fall. Thanks everyone.